like to dive right in with this question. What matters to you?
What matters to me? What matters is helping to raise the consciousness of the planet at this point and doing what I can to help to facilitate that in a responsible, spiritual, elevated way.
And does your relationship to your faith have an impact on your work to do that?
Definitely. Definitely. It makes up who I am as an individual. And so having faith and devotion in a particular way of life and belief system is ultimately important to me. It enables me to do the work that I do.
And it seems like there is this division that happens, I think with many of us between whether or not we're hopeful or we're feeling like everything is going in the wrong direction, right? So do you have that pulled yourself into, oh my gosh, what's happening in the world right now? Like, if you watch the news and you see everything that's happening, or trusting in God and just saying, I don't understand, the reasons why all these things are happening, but I'm not going to lose my faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a little of both. Actually, it is quite overwhelming when you see the news. And at the same time, to understand that it's part of what I call the Kali Yuga. It's part of a darkness before the light. And if anything, it makes each one of us who is conscious on this planet to be so even in a more comprehensive way and taking it more seriously. For instance, like voting. You can't sit this one out, So definitely there's hope because the sun will always shine, whether it's cloudy today. But at the same time, it is concerning. I'm very concerned about it. But again, doing what you can to help to make it better. Not complain about it, but do what you can to make it better.
This responsibility is what I hear you talking about, that each of us have to make things better. Often, I think it can feel overwhelming, especially in today's world we're exposed to so many different things. And the question comes, what does my life matter? What does it matter what I do? The flip side, I think, is what you're talking about, is it matters very much. And our lives are important. And that choice that each of us make between feeling like my life doesn't matter and my life means everything.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, it does matter. And, bluntly said, the world doesn't need another idiot walking the planet. But it does need another conscious person. And however it's manifested in the work they do or how they live their life, that does matter. That another conscious person is walking the planet. And again, however they manifest that consciousness is ultimately important.
And isn't it also practical to just focus on yourself and your life? Because that's what we have a more intimate relationship and control with, right? We can't control all those other things. We can control this body, this form. So on a very rational level, doesn't it make more sense to focus on that and spend our times working on our own personal development?
I think both. Both is necessary. Of course, that's ultimately important to work on yourself and do your practice and live a particular lifestyle, whatever it is that a person believes. And at the same time, the responsibility as a citizen in this country, like I said, to go out and vote and not sit this one out. So it's both. It's my own personal life as well as the bigger we.
Right. But do you find that if you do more work with the inner self, the personal self, that those external decisions just happen? Like, okay, you get more clean and healthy yourself. So then that opens you up to voting and having a life of service. Like, right? There's this relationship between those two things. It's not that, you just focus on doing your own work and then that leads to sitting inside all day and not take any action.
Right. It's also a social conscious responsibility. So, yes, it's definitely necessary you do what you can in your own personal life and get the best version of yourself that you can. And then, of course, it doesn't stop there, but how else can I facilitate change? What other things can I do that are going to make a difference?
I wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind just explaining what Kundalini Yoga is briefly.
Mm-hmm. Kundalini Yoga, the definition is the yoga of awareness. So it's a conscious effort to work with the energy within our body and to raise that energy to our higher centers of consciousness. So it's about not just doing postures perfectly, which is the physical aspect of yoga, but it's also about the mental focus and state of mind, the decisiveness, the consciousness mentally within us, and then also the spirit, the vivaciousness, the love of life, the prana, the vitality. And that's where we extend out. So again, it's not just how nice I look in a leotard or even how perfectly I do a posture. All that is important, but it's not the end goal. You could be a yogi and do it in a chair because that's what you can do. But yet at the same time be a yogi, which definition is unaffected by the pair of opposites, which means, during a negative or a positive situation, you remain neutral as a yogi. So if a person is unable to sit on the floor and do what we know as traditional yoga set, and they may have limited capacity and only do what's possible in a chair, but yet still be a very conscious person or neutral-minded person, unaffected by the pair of opposites, that's also a definition. But actually, the yoga of awareness is what Kundalini Yoga is, and we're working with the energy within the body.
Why do you think that word is so important? Awareness, to be aware.
Well, it's opposed to sleeping, to getting what we call temporary amnesia, where sometimes an individual goes to sleep in life and they start forgetting their ultimate connection to their source, whether you call it creator, God, universal energy, or you don't have to call it anything, but that to know that we're humbled to one thing, and that's the one who gives us the breath of life. And as we remember that, we feel connection, we feel connected to that source. When we forget that is sometimes when we start chasing after things that don't ultimately give us happiness, like chasing after money or power or finding great identity in my beauty. These are just, temporary. That's not ultimately your value. But I believe that the value ultimately in a person is how much they feel connected to their source. It's a great humility that as great as we are, that we're humbled to something. And that's the remembrance of our Creator, the one who gives us, maintains us, sustains us every moment of the day. And the proof is the breath of life.
The humility makes me think that there really isn't anything to take credit for. And that feels like a very far out idea in our culture today, because it's all about what is my value? How do I stack up to someone else? And it's all just taking credit for my actions, for who I am, what I look like. But if we're humble and instead saying, this is how I was created, in all parts of me, not just my physical body, but my mind, then what is there to take credit for?
Right. Yeah, and I think it goes back to what we talked about, that remembrance, that, yes, if you are given a particular talent in something, one way of looking at it is, yes, taking personal credit for it. I'm fantastic. I created this. And it begins and ends with you, rather than another person may view it as, yes, it's true, I did create that, but it's a gift that I was given. I'm like a conduit. Mm. And you remember that it is a gift, you're a conduit, and it could be taken from you also at any moment. Mm. And that's what I refer to as humility, a grace, an attitude of grace.
Mm. Personally, in your day-to-day life and within your day, do you feel as if this is a constant feeling for you of remembering this humility and this grace? Or is it kind of a process of remembering and forgetting and remembering? And is that where the sadhana comes in, where the spiritual practices, where, it's a process of reminding ourselves, oh, okay,
Right. I think the whole thing is a constant process. It's like we're never there yet. There's no graduation. I mean, it's every day. And, one can only pray and hope for that they live in that state of awareness. But, to be very practical, we're human beings. We get into things we forget during the busyness of the day. And sometimes we're so involved in whatever it is we're doing, we forget. It's not, I can't say it's 100% constant, but again, soon enough, there'll be sadhana time or time to meditate where we have the gift of that remembrance. So you try not to stray too far away from those things that keep us in that remembrance, in that state of mind, of humility.
So this program that you did this weekend, it's on the yogic science of addiction, right? So what is the science of addiction?
Well, what we have organized is we know about addictions and how rampant they are, not only in substances, but also behavioral. And I think it's happening more and more because people are feeling more disconnected from their source. And it's almost like going around with a big hole in the center of their being. And that emptiness is trying to be filled with other things that temporary give that fulfillment. But of course, they're only temporary. What we've done is applied the yogic teachings, whether it's a kriya, a meditation, even nutritionally, a particular diet or juice blend or vitamin therapy, to help to correct and heal that personality of addiction. So, and it's all possible, but it's a process, and it's a new way of dealing with even healthcare in this country, because I think we have this quick fix mentality. Here, take this pill and everything will be fine. And that's really a fantasy. It's a non-functional reality to think that this pill is going to satisfy and take care of all my needs. It just doesn't work that way. It works through constant practice and diligence and dedication and devotion, physically, mentally, and spiritually.
You spoke about this hole, like a feeling of emptiness and therefore the substances fill that hole. Do you have anything to say about how that hole is created to begin with? Are children born with that hole, or are children full? And then somehow that fullness goes away and a sort of emptiness replaces it. And then the addiction and substance abuse comes after that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ave. I'm glad you asked it because, my belief is that the children are born innocent and pure, and they're born intuitively intelligent. Their crown, their top chakra is open, the soft spot on the baby's head. They're completely one with their creator. They're completely connected. They're intuitive. And then what happens? What happens? Things happen in people's lives, in children's lives, as they are growing and highly impressionable. And what we call, they get imprinted into their psyche a certain belief system according to their day-to-day reality. So if, for instance, they're going to be growing in an environment where the communication to this child is either, we don't have enough time for you, be quiet. They put a crying child in another room. Well, what message is that child getting? Rather than tending to their needs, they're getting rejected. That's all they feel. I'm isolated. Maybe my crying doesn't have a voice. I'm not important. Maybe they're getting physically hit or slapped. Very mistrusting, fearful environment, a violent situation. If they're getting scolded and yelled at, is another mental trauma that could be formulating. And on and on and on. And so it doesn't take long, maybe 3 years. Yogi Bhajan's teachings were that you could be a potential, whether it's drugs or whatever your drug of choice is, could even be food, by 3 years old. By 7 years old, you're confirmed. By 11, you're guaranteed into it, unless something changes. And so they begin to see these patterns that nothing that I could do can facilitate change. I can't change the way my parents treat me or the way they listen to me or don't. And so after a while, that becomes their belief system. This is what I believe. Who I am in relation to myself, to my parents, to my environment, how the world is at large. If their little world at home is very mistrusting or fearful, they may carry that out to the rest of the world. The world is a mistrusting place because that's all they know. And so you could basically sum that up in 2 words. It's emotionally painful. And once you get to that place, nobody wants to go through that every day, to have that kind of pain. It's like, let me just go numb, and I don't want to feel this. And once you get to that place, there are many ways how to go numb and just survive rather than thrive.
That, I think, is a big difference in outlook on life, whether we're moving through our lives just trying to survive, or, as I've heard you say, that this life is a gift. Seeing it that way as an opportunity. Yeah. So the substances, do you think substance abuse is directly related to that mentality of just trying to survive, just trying to get through?
Sure. It's a lot of it. And, I have to say, it's not only situations as dramatic as what I presented. Some people use substances or alcohol, again, or whatever their drug of choice is, and they have perfectly healthy home environment growing up. So they're not immune to it either. But I think the one commonality is that disconnection of spirit. Is, once that disconnection and disharmony grows, people are growing in an environment where they really don't know who they are or who they belong to, what their purpose in life is, what their values are. And so they may grow, again, whether a healthy environment at home or not, they may grow in an environment where they just, they're lost. And they may find their identity in how much money I have, or how much power I have, how many people I could push around or hire and fire at will. So I think the one commonality is that disconnection of their spirit.
And is the connection to the spirit directly related to our ability to slow down, just the speed of our mode of operation, right? Do you need to slow down a bit to take the time and reflect on your life and consider, what does my heart even want? What do I want to be doing with this time? But it seems very easy to just move so fast. And so is the speed at which our culture moving at an obstacle in connection with the spirit?
Yeah, I think very much so, because things are so accelerated. Nobody has time for anything. And it's not slowing down anytime soon. And so the pace that we're operating, where everything is available to us, through the internet, through our Google, you can Google anything. But there's pluses and minuses to that. It's true, everything is available for every one of us. Everything is transparent, which has its amazing asset. And of course, the negative aspect of that is eventually we just have the possibility of blowing a fuse. It's too much. The Yogi Bhajan coined it information dementia syndrome, is that with this bombardment of information coming at us very fast and unending, is eventually we just hit a gap. And that's when the wire gets frazzled. And the nervous system cannot contain with all this information bombardment. That's when people start doing very, very kind of crazy thing, jumping out the window, having a nervous breakdown, or just the way they live their life, very edgy and risky. Not really positive. So I think the acceleration through all these devices is highly stressful, and people are just looking for any kind of way to de-stress, even if it's for a moment. So they'll reach for bourbon on the rocks, or some pill, or even in food. For some people, food becomes their numbing agent. So, or, there are many, many different ways how people check out.
Right. Through your experience, how have you seen people turn the corner? Like, is the most common way by having some sort of breakdown and kind of going past your edge? Or do you see many cases where someone says, okay, I see the direction I'm going in, starting to, feel so much stress. I'm relying on all of these different things. I don't want to keep going like that. Mm-hmm. Do you have any recommendations if someone kind of sees, okay, I'm moving in this direction, I want to turn the corner?
Yeah, I think, at that moment and period in a person's life is actually quite exciting, because they are at a crossroads. and they have choices, and they realize they have choices. And that's good to have options. And I think the wonderful thing that's happening, especially here in America, is that yoga is becoming more and more popular and accepted and available. And so, once people have that curiosity, even about what else is there for me, many times some class may be available right down the street, just because times are changing. And so I think that part of it is good, and just to continue to nurture even that curiosity or that slight questioning of what's it all about. Certainly if a person has some kind of a breakdown, whether it's bankruptcy or a health issue or a divorce in someone's life, as painful and difficult as any one of those are, sometimes that becomes the motivator of change. They realize that they don't have it all together, that they're not fully in control of everything and rotating the planet, that maybe that's their source of humility. So different people find it through different ways, but either way, it's a blessing.
Do you think it's important to realize the significance of social pressure, our sangha, our community? Meaning that, do you find that human beings in general are social creatures, so that what everyone is doing around me is going to impact what I do myself? And if everyone else is, eating in this kind of way, using these things, it's very confusing, right? To say, I'm not going to be included in any of that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to step outside. The easier thing seems to say, okay, everyone's doing this. It probably makes sense. Otherwise, why would they do it? Mm-hmm. And so to instead be like a harbinger of change and develop a different lifestyle. And then, as you're saying, it's already happening, starting to create more of a lifestyle of yoga and yoga community. And then it becomes a lot easier when you have friends and you have examples of other people who are changing their habits and their lifestyles.
Yes. And that's what you call Sangha. And that's the support system. And that's your camaraderie, your community. It becomes a smart way to go, to surround yourself with like-minded people with the same values and interests and way of life, what's important to them. It's difficult to be around people that are living what you might call like in the undertow, getting pulled down. Now, sometimes you cannot avoid it. Sometimes it might be a work environment, and you can't dictate who your coworkers are. So sometimes you may be able to make that decision with who you surround yourself with. Like a place like this, people choose to be here and like-minded people with similar values. That's a support system. The probability of them maintaining that consciousness and that effort is high because of like-minded people. Or like I said, if in a work environment, you may not be able to dictate that and may have some other challenges. And that's also one of the reasons why we meditate and practice yoga, to develop that inner strength and grit, so that if you are in a situation where you're different, you could sustain that. It's not a big deal if you choose to be different or live differently and have different values. That's just your identity, and you feel secure in that.
How about trauma and hardships of the past? Because it seems as if people can have very different reactions to challenging things that have happened to them in the past. Either you can say, my life has just been terrible, and I have a bad lot, and kind of feel sorry for the situation that you're in. Or you can take that and say, if not for that, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. So the same thing can happen, and two totally different outcomes or perspectives can be taken on that. Any comment on that from your experience that you've seen kind of had a shift from maybe the first one to the second one?
Well, it very much is true. Two people can have similar situations and deal with it in very different ways and process it or not process it in very different ways. One person may decide consciously or unconsciously to bury it and to actually forget about it, but deal with some of the scars and wounds and from the past. And other people might really want to excel and be done with it and work through it in, whether it's counseling or yogic technology, or some people medicate. So different people process things in different way. But I also think, all in its own time. And when it's ripe and when it's ready, the assistance will be there.
Do you find that much of our culture now is divisive in our mentality, where we choose sides, and also we're always kind of thinking what is better and what is worse? And so this is related to substance abuse, perhaps, where it's, if I just get high or if I just eat that's good. But if I don't have that, then it's bad. So instead of accepting the full gamut of our lives, the fluctuations that happen, we're compartmentalizing our lives and saying, I like this, I don't like that, and constantly searching for what we like and avoiding what we don't like.
Right. And I think some of that is just judgment. We put judgment on things, but, selecting or cherry picking situations, only what I like, and avoiding, well, to a certain extent, it makes sense to avoid things that are distasteful to you or that harmful to you. And then life hits, and there are things that just happen. So as much as a person may try to avoid it, things happen. And sometimes you just have to deal with it and you can't get out of it. And again, it's how you deal with it. Not to create this utopian situation where you're untouched by anything what you call bad, but that, if and when the clouds come and that day happens, how am I going to be able to deal with it? Do I have the stamina, the wherewithal, the trust, the faith to be able to deal with it without getting sucked into it or pulled down, like I said, into the undertow of life, but to be able to ride the waves as best you can while dealing with real life.
Are obstacles really opportunities? Like, do you believe that when we encounter obstacles that's actually an opportunity for us to grow or learn something?
Certainly, and it can be, but again, it's the outlook. It's a person's outlook. They could just see a challenge as, oh, here it comes again, and I'm doomed person, and not see it as any kind of opportunity, but to, bear with it and, just not really see it as any kind of benefit. So that if I meet this challenge in a successful way, I could come out of it a stronger, better person. That's a healthy outlook, I think. People come out of a challenge, a crisis, as almost a different person. Not that they were looking forward to going through it, but sometimes you can't go around it. And many times you come out a far better, stronger person. But not everybody sees it that way or sees every single challenge that way.
I often think about, whether it's rational to create challenges for ourselves, if we believe that, and kind of how to guide ourselves through life in terms of our relationship with challenge. So I think all of us are going to experience challenge no matter what, right? There's going to be aspects of life that are difficult. But does it make sense to consciously create a challenge? And I think we do it a lot, even in terms of our physical exercise. You decide to do an Ironman or a marathon or something like that. Is a hard thing to do, and we identify, okay, that's hard, but how am I going to feel, afterward? So myself, I'm not sure where I stand on this, whether it makes sense to think about, okay, how can I work more challenges into my life, or to just say, okay, I want to, gracefully handle challenges when they come, because they're going to come.
Right. Either way, I think people are just trying to figure out, a person has to know who they are. And so some people may decide to try to figure out who they are by winning an Olympic medal. And this becomes their identity. And they've been challenged. They've challenged themselves. They've met the challenge. They've accomplished and achieved. And that becomes their identity, to know who they are. And it pretty much starts and stops there at their particular talent or sport, whatever it is. Other people may choose to, willingly challenge themselves just because maybe they're boredom or, but I think the end goal is people just want to know who they are. What am I made up of? And other people may not be interested in that at all. And like you said, they're just trying to avoid challenges. And, if they come, when they come, I'll deal with it. But I'm sure not looking for anything, not going out of my way to be challenged. And life is fine. And just leave it at that. But I think the crux of it is people are just trying to figure out, who am I?
And is there a difference between wanting to know who am I, what am I made out of, just for the sake of it, or in relationship to other people? Like, how do I compare? That seems like a very common motivation. I don't want to just know who I am or what I'm made of. I want to know how good I am compared to other people.
Right. That competitive spirit. Yeah. I think a lot of people, certainly have that, to compare and compete. And your value is measured in that. I think when a person starts to lead a more spiritual life, it seems to me that becomes less important to compare and compete. You'll always find somebody who does things better. You'll always find someone who does things not quite as good as you do. But again, is that your value? So I think once a person starts living more spiritual, that becomes less important, and it's more about you within you.
The word spiritual and a spiritual life, I think we often tag people, you're a spiritual person. Do you feel that we all are spiritual and that every person, yearns to lead a spiritual life?
Definitely. There was a saying, we're born spiritual, here to experience a human existence, or something like that. There's a quote like that. I do believe that we're born spiritual, all of us. All of us are born with the crown open. All of us are born intuitively intelligent. Children, without being taught, they know their intuitive instincts are working. But I think then it's, we kind of deviate from that just because there are so many things to distract us from that spiritual nature. but they're, a lot of them are just distractions, and they're part of life and they're things to enjoy, but to be aware not to get attached to it.
Which leads me to this quote from Yogi Bhajan. You do not have the mental capacity to guide yourself by intuition. I heard him say that. Do not have the mental capacity to guide yourself by intuition. So my question is related to intuition. What is our intuition, and does our ego often kind of masquerade as intuition, but that's not really what our intuition is?
Right. Good question. Well, like I've been saying, I do believe we've been born intuitive. And then what happens? Something happens. I think the world is a busy place and the world is a noisy place. And so, especially in cities, that with all the noise, we have very abrasive, even some of the music that we hear is very harsh and abrasive to the sensitivity of the ear. Or in the city, hearing loud noises or honking horns and just that whole busyness. In summary, it creates a desensitivity. And so what happens to the intuition? It sets the stage for the intuition to start shutting down. That sixth sense of just knowing. And so out of necessity, it just begins to shut down and become less available to us. So much so that some people think there isn't even anything about intuition, or I don't have any intuition, that they actually believe that. Actually, Kundalini Yoga is a way to reawaken that sleeping intuition, to reawaken that again. But I think the question that you asked about the difference between intuition and ego is, ego is, trying to make a decision, but that you really want a particular outcome, and you're invested in that. And your mind could play tricks, like, oh yeah, I have a voice to do it. But the question is, were you so invested in doing that regardless? Because as humans, when we want something, we really want it. And we want it now. And we're so powerful that we could actually make things happen. We could create a sequence of events to make things happen. And if it's not intuition and it's really our ego, many times it just blows up at us because we wanted it, we were attached to it, we made it happen. If it's not in our best interest, it could let us know pretty quickly this wasn't really a good idea. Mm-hmm. But to really work at quieting the mind and its attachments and allurements, and really, in through meditation, get to that place where that voice of the silence is actually speaking, and to see what comes. And then that voice of the intuition, and then, on the other hand, not to overthink it. Because sometimes we get into that where it will be the intuition and then we try to analyze it. So much so that it may not make sense through the analytical mind and we overthink it. And then we don't follow that intuition and then that blows up. So it's really tricky. But I think the more sensitive we become, the more that voice of the intuition awakens and speaks. And then to listen to that and to trust it and to try and to see, did it work out? Is it good? Is it in my best interest? So you have enough experiences like that, and then you know, okay, it is my intuition, and I do have this access available to me, and to use it as a tool.
Intuition is a tool, or
You
the
could
mind?
use that as a tool
Yeah.
in life to guide you as a guiding principle. Imagine if every decision you made was based on your intuition.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to weigh the pros, to weigh the cons, and then to bring that to meditation and then just see what comes.
The mind itself, it seems that our relationship to our mind and our thoughts is really important on the path. The mind is amazing, right? The human mind, there's evidence all over of the, amazing capabilities of the human mind. At the same time, I think the essence of the spiritual path is I don't know, and seeing the limitation of the small self or the mind. Is that very important on the path to kind of, again, use humility, as you said, to reflect on the mind and form an appropriate relationship with the mind? That my mind is an amazing tool, so you admire it, you admire what it can do, but at the same time say, I don't know, I don't need, in relationship to our wants directly, I think that this would be a good thing for me to have, be good for me to have more money or more things or whatever. I want that. But ultimately, I don't know. And God, it's up to you. You know what's best for me.
Right. Yeah, I think that I think the key there is really attachment. It's okay to want things and to need things, and it's perfectly okay. Like I said, weighing the pros and cons in life situation, having a mind as a gift, as a tool, an intelligent mind, and to be able to weigh and assess. The thing that I think gets us in trouble is when we get attached to things through our mind and through our ego. And we want things very, very badly, and we want it right now. And through our will, we can make things happen. And then the question is that God's will? And when we start getting signs and signals that, maybe it really isn't in our best interest, to have the wherewithal and the discipline to back off, rather than to just push through it anyway and pay the price.
But is there anywhere that God's not? Is there such a thing as not being God's will? Right?
I think all is according to God's will. He is the doer.
So even if we don't back off, maybe we weren't supposed to back off that time. That's what makes it tricky, right?
Yeah, exactly. But, we're here to learn things. We're here to learn certain lessons, and sometimes we have to learn harsh lessons in a difficult way so that we really get it and we really understand it. But it's all a big school, really. It's just a learning process. And hopefully we learn our lessons well, so we keep repeating that which works and keep minimizing that which doesn't until, we finally get it, whatever those messages of life is.
Yeah, Swami Satchidananda loves to say that this is all a school. Well, life is a university. And as soon as I hear that, a certain lightness, a feeling of lightness comes over me. So is there a line between, as you said, honoring your life, taking it seriously, but at the same time, also being very light about how we move through everything and almost seeing it as a fun game. And is that element of funness very important on a spiritual path?
I do believe so, because I think that, especially, when a person is just beginning on a spiritual path, they tend to be very serious. And through their devotion, though, I must say, they take it to heart, and everything becomes very, very rigid and serious. And I think after a while, like where Swamiji's state of mind was and consciousness was eventually is to become a little bit less edgy and a little bit more rounded and just see the play in it. And as you say, the humor in it. And basically it's like, don't bother yourself, but in a good way, in a healthy way, that you see the signs and it's like, don't go there. So in that regard, it becomes a little bit less serious, and you're quicker to pick up the signs of what is or isn't than, just the seriousness of each and every situation.
You find that a feeling that whatever path you take is the right path because that's the path you're taking, that attitude leads to taking the right path more often. You understand what I mean? Like a certain allowance for, as opposed to a rigidness of, I have to make this decision and I have to make the right decision. As the flip side of that being, if I decide this, it's going to be right. If I decide that's going to be right. And that lightness allows for more right decision making.
Right, some breathing room.
Yeah.
And I think it ultimately is compassion toward the self, is not to be so hard on yourself. There is no perfect situation. There is no life that's perfect. There is no life without mistakes and without learning opportunities. Sometimes, I know for myself, I like to know. I like to be clear about something. The discomfort for me is ambiguity, where you're not quite sure what to do. That's very confusing for me. Even if the path is hard, but I'm clear of what it is, I'd rather do that than just be floundering around, not knowing. But sometimes we really don't know, and you have to relax into that state of unknowing and to just, until you're supposed to know, will you? And sometimes you just have to relax there, even though it might not be comfortable.
Okay, final question. Can you share one thing that you would like to improve upon yourself?
Personally?
Personally, yeah.
Well, I think like anything, discipline. And, I'm a human being. Sometimes you do better, I do better, or worse even at my own discipline. And so I think just, being more and more devoted, disciplined in my own practice is always something that I think will benefit me and ultimately benefit the world at large. The more I could improve myself is a contribution to the conscious effort of all of humanity.
I have to ask one follow-up question on discipline. Because, is discipline something that confines us, or ultimately is our discipline an avenue to free us, to make us more free?
I think it's like a path, a pathway. It's a road. I think the ultimate goal of discipline gets us to where we want to go, rather than floundering with no path. or no road up ahead. It's almost like having a flashlight in a dark tunnel. It makes sense to go with a light, to follow the flashlight, than to kind of try to make my way through in the dark and stumble, but to go with the flashlight and just get there. So it's kind of similar to that. It's a pathway.
Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
It's been my pleasure, Ari.
Really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll close with the sound of Om. Om.